Hello to my panelists. It's interesting. I don't have one single panelist here in Nigeria. So this is really a diverse Pan-African international panel. And I am your host, Beverly Agbakoba Legal, and I am a partner in the sports, entertainment, and technology practice. I hope you can all hear me. I'm suddenly sensitive. Thinking maybe no one can hear, but I hope you can hear me. And today I have some amazing panelists, got an array of panelists from different parts of the African continent. So when we're talking about Africa, when we're talking about ESG, sports, we are talking about it in an African context, okay? Because the world is global. We're no longer operating in our little country silos. So I'm pleased to have Joseph Chimpapwe. I'm starting from the top left, going to the right and down. Joseph Chimpapwe, who is the CEO of the Zambian Premier League. And it will interest you to know that he spent some time in Nigeria working in risk management, audit at EcoBank. So he knows us quite well. So welcome to you, Joseph. My right, I have Rachel A. Aaron, and she is the co-founder of Sustainable Sport Africa. And in addition to that, she's a notable and renowned ESG expert. Her expertise cuts across different sectors, not just sports, but because of passion for sports, she also has this specific sporting consultancy, which advises ESG range of countries to a range of companies all over. And to my bottom left, I have Mr. Olumide Lala, who is the co-founder and ED of Climate Transition Limited. And an interesting fact about him also, part of a very important change management team that came into the Nigerian Stock Exchange sometime between, I think, 2011 and 2014. So he did a lot of amazing management work. So we're speaking with some consummate professionals, I must say, with diverse backgrounds and experiences. So we are going to have a very, very interesting conversation. So we're going to go straight into the questions. We really want to hear from the audience. Today, we want to hear from you. We want you to interact with these amazing people who you do not ordinarily get a chance to see. Please, as the conversation is going, put your questions in the Q&A box so they can be answered. And there will be an opportunity for you to come up to speak and make contributions, share your perspectives, and also ask some questions that perhaps were not answered during the conversation. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn my first question. I mean, if you think the intro was good enough, fine, but please feel free to do it a bit more justice. Use yourself. But I'm going to begin firstly with this question. What exactly is ESG reporting? We have many people in this audience who may or may not know what it is. And we know that it's a nascent area, not to mention we're talking about it in a niche context, which is to do with sports organizations. So it's a two-part question. What is ESG reporting and how can it be applied to sports organizations? And again, when I say sports organizations, I know people automatically think federations, associations, but we really want people to be aware of the commercial aspects of sports, commercial sports businesses, commercial sports IP firms, commercial sports manufacturers, sports agencies. So just to get that into the kit. So I'll let you go ahead. Thank you.
No, thank you. Good afternoon, Nadia. No, your introduction was fabulous, Beverly. There's no need. So what is ESG reporting? ESG reporting consists of reporting on what your sports organization is doing to address, manage, and monitor ESG considerations. Now, what is ESG? We hear this word, but it actually has this acronym, it actually has three parts. There's the environment part, the social part, and the governance. So it means that when you're talking about ESG reporting, you're talking about on the environmental issues related to biodiversity, climate change, health and safety, supply chain management, for instance, or social issues related to gender, diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, stakeholder engagement, cultural heritage, or governance, where we're talking about good governance practices, ethics, cybersecurity, and data protection. So these are just some of the issues around the E, the S, and G that sports organizations like yours can consider reporting. But now, more importantly, because it seems heavy, and you might be wondering, okay, these are things that should be covered in terms of topics, but then where do I get started in my organization? You can look at the different layers. You can look at how is your board, if you have one, addressing ESG? How is the management addressing ESG? How is the staff addressing ESG? So first look internally within your organization to see how it's being handled at those levels. Then you can look externally in terms of external stakeholders like your suppliers, local community members, to understand holistically where ESG sits for you, both internally and externally. Now, there's been a lot of misunderstanding on what ESG is, even sometimes amongst ESG professionals, at least maybe the real ones, and what I'd probably call the ones who are fronting and faking, because that also exists in our profession, unfortunately. But African sports have definitely been impacted by ESG. So it's really important as sports organizations to be able to embrace ESG impacts and understand how they are contextualized, informed by our African realities. So how we see ESG in Africa will have similarities elsewhere, but will have certain nuances and differences. So you need to embrace ESG as a core part of your business from both a risk perspective and an opportunity perspective, and the reporting needs to reflect that. And though sports and ESG have been talked about often, and that's the beauty of the webinar today, a lot of other sectors such as infrastructure and finance across Africa have already embraced ESG. So sports is not all the way at the end, but sports needs to catch up, and that's the point. Now, finally, I'll end on this note. ESG reporting can be in different forms and in different frequencies, but this must be informed by different factors, specifically the size of your sports organization, the scale of your operations, and the nature of internal and external stakeholders. And ESG-related content that you report on can feature through different channels, social media posts, annual reports, as well as even standalone ESG annual reports, advertisements, CSR program reports, directives, and report management and the board. Thank you.
Thank you for that fantastic introduction. You really laid it out very nicely. And the most important takeaway being that ESG is not something necessarily new. Sports is just playing catch up. ESGs in other areas, particularly finance, construction, areas like that. So thank you so much for laying that out. Now, I want to move my question over to Mr. Lala. Mr. Lala, what are some of the ESG risks and opportunities that organizations in Africa need to?
Good morning from London. It's good to be here, and thanks for inviting us. I think Rachel's presentation is actually a good segue into this question. The first thing to understand is that sports organizations are businesses. They're business with operations, they're business with reputations, and essentially this needs to be managed. Now, even though the topic here is about reporting, first things first, you've got to even understand what the metrics are and what it is you're actually measuring before you report. So in terms of the operations and what a business faces from an ESG, and we'll talk environmental and governance perspective in terms of some of the risks that they face, it's no different to any other organization that we look at. But then, of course, the operations of a sport is slightly different, and that's where the nuances are. So in terms of the environmental risk, we sometimes talk about extreme weather changes and things like that. This typically disrupts sporting events, damage infrastructure, which, as you would expect, would have implications from a profitability, cash flow, when it comes to operations of a business, or even the sporting individuals themselves work within the sport or the sporting talents. So this is definitely could potentially affect safeties of players in terms of infrastructure where they actually train or play. So these are things that need to be recognized. In terms of natural resources, even our utilization of water scarcity is a major issue on the continent. So, organizations need to understand how they use the water resources available to them, how it affects their neighbors and their stakeholders. Energy shortages will have impact on facilities, irrigation of sporting fields, for instance. I mean, especially when you talk about football. I mean, my kid plays American football, for instance, which is where my interest comes into this. But even when you look at the grounds, you see the grounds being watered, especially on the continent, because naturally we know that Africa is the warmest continent in the world. We need to water these facilities. How we use that water impacts on our neighbors and our stakeholders, and that needs to be understood. Waste management is another thing. We have sporting venues, where people come, and when they leave, God knows they look atrocious after the customers have left. How do we manage our waste? Where do we dump this? How do we actually structure to ensure that it's properly utilized? What recycling facilities do we have in those sporting facilities, such that people are not chucking things? We can recycle plastic. We can utilize certain facilities, maybe water fountains, rather than selling things in plastics. All of that stuff are areas where we can educate management, and those are some of the things that provide risk to the ecosystems. Now, from a social perspective, which is now you're talking about people and how people are treated. In the organization, natural organizations, you look to things like gender equality and all that stuff. Now, sports typically, and I sad to say, it's an equal over the years, the genders in terms of their pay structure and things like that, there's been some equality being fought around places like tennis and all that stuff. But sports like football, there's still a differential in the way it's being perceived from the male or the female, and that's not talking about the guys that even the sports athletes on the field of play itself, but those who work within the organization. Only recently do we have female referees in international matches. So all this stuff are things that we need to look at from a policy perspective. Interracial, the way people are treated in stadiums today. Look, you have that detailed every single day. Even people keep talking about guys like the Euro Commission, let alone AFCON. We've just had the AFCON in Africa, lovely performance. Sadly, Nigeria didn't win, but nonetheless, it was a wonderful entertainment for all to see. Because it was on the continent, there wasn't too much trouble where race was concerned. But at the same time, gender issues comes into it. So there's a lot of that. Now, governance, obviously, accountability is one thing that we always talk about. Accountability in governance structures increases the risk of corruption, bribery, unethical behaviors. These are some of the things that we need to look at. Potentially could lead to the reputation damage for certain organizations, not necessarily sports themselves, but those associated with those institutions. And finally, the board diversity I already spoke about. The director level, we need to see more of that changing, because obviously it's still a men-dominated environment. We see more women coming into it. I mean, I love the passion you bring to some of the conferences that you and I have attended, Beverly. I see a lot of that, but it needs to be translated beyond just the conferences onto the boardroom. Finally, in terms of opportunity, vast. I've spoken to some of them. In terms of energy efficient infrastructure, renewable energy, we can look to see how we can make our stadiums more energy efficient. Water conservation measures to reduce operational costs. Community engagement, social engagement, bringing the community closer and strengthening relationships, the goodwill that brings. And of course, as I said, diversity. More to talk about much later, but I think I'll rest at this point.
Oh my goodness, that was an amazing, you're welcome. That was an amazing, just, if you don't mind, I'll use the word dump. You literally just laid it on the risks, but when you were talking about the risks, all I kept hearing was opportunities. You went through the environmental factors, and a lot of the environmental factors you discussed are things we are suffering, but say in my part of the world, which is Nigeria, the power shorts. And I kept thinking, these risks present opportunities for entrepreneurs to move into. It presents opportunities for entrepreneurs to solve problems. So you're looking at power. How do we solve the problem of power, alternative power, green energy, the water utilization? Talked about, I was making notes, talked about infrastructural damage. I think maybe the role of insurance could come in there more. So I really like how, as you were raising all the risks, at the same time, you were bringing up areas where there's potential opportunities to not just make money, but to actually improve the industry. You talked about capacity building. You talked about the gender imbalance, right? So if there's a gender imbalance, that presumably means we need to train up more ladies, for instance, to become referees. Who will do the training? That's an opportunity right there for the federations, if they're listening, if we are watching this, and then for the ladies who ordinarily would not go into that area, a career line. That's suddenly a new opportunity that she can move into. So all I kept hearing was opportunities. We also talked about health and safety issues with the way the climate is changing. Even, I don't know if it's relevant to mention, even the way the last World Cup was held in November, to take into account the fact that region had severe heat. So for the first time, you are altering the schedule. And that is because of the effect of the weather. So weather, environmental risks, extreme weather can also play a role in the way we plan and run decision making. So thank you very much. I thought that was a really nice way to lay it out. And I hope people are making notes because there's a lot of opportunities I'm hearing. So now I want to move on to Joseph Chipakwe again, the CEO of the Zambian Premier League, the Consumer Risk Management Professional. So as the CEO of a league, Premier League, my question to you is, you already have an advantage, Joseph. You have a risk management. You understand it in advice boards, executives, chairs, CEOs in similar organizations, federations, associations that want to begin to look at these issues. Where do they start from? It's a myriad, so many complex interrelated issues. Where do they begin to look? Do they look at governance first, or do they go to the social, or do they go to environmental? So I guess my question to you is, what can senior management officials of sports organizations, in Africa play to promote it? And let me put it to you, not just those in federations. We have some members of the audience here that I recognize that are running very credible, reputable leagues. I think I saw one in the audience. He's running a league, a fantastic intercollegiate league. What can people like him do who are starting small, then trickle all the way up to the federation bosses? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think first and foremost, we have to realize, especially in the African context, that this is going to be some big change. This will be a transformation.
Joseph, Joseph, sorry, you got two lines open. If you can mute.
Can you please remove the one? Sorry, maybe try to.
We've got a echo going on.
Hello?
I think your phone is on and your computer is on, perhaps.
You can switch one off. Okay, better. Okay. You can turn yours on now. No, unmute yourself. You need to unmute yourself. Can the host unmute him, please? You're unmute. Okay, let me. Williams, could you unmute Mr. Joseph? Not that one, the other one. Yeah, the other one. Unmute.
He has to do it from his own end.
Okay. Oh, I see. Joseph,
Yeah.
we can't hear you.
Can you get me now?
Okay. It's echoing though.
Okay. Yeah, so what I was alluding to, that ESG by its nature, it's something very new, especially in the African context. So it's about transformation. As leaders, we need to realize that this is transformation. When you talk about transformation, there are three things you need to realize. First and foremost, we need to know what is the cause of the change. What is the end in mind? Then secondly, there should be the design and dialogue. Yeah, they're designing a new product. How are you dialoguing with all the major stakeholders? And lastly, what is the new now? Where are we getting to? There has to be that appreciation. Then secondly, there is an aspect of transformational culture. You know, as they say, culture eats strategy for breakfast. You can have a strategy, but if a culture is wrong, I mean, you are missing the target. It's a pellet gun approach. So you have to give that aim. So, and you know, when you talk about culture, it's basically aligning the individual and organizational goals. So when it comes to ESG, it's a very new product. I call it a product, and you have to ensure that, you know, it's translated right through the organization. I think Rachel alluded to the aspect that you need to look both internally and externally. So ESG reports are inevitable in the transformation. People do what is expected of them and not what is expected of them. So as leaders, through the reports, they'll give us that leverage to know and your people to understand. The threats will be set, the objectives are outlined, so everyone knows what they want to do. But in most cases, especially in the African context, we just expect people, because we've done the program and we leave there, and there is no implementation is affected. So ESG reports provide panacea to highlight the key goals and objectives, risks, and mitigants, as the case may be. I think Olomude handled that ably. And as leaders, we need to play a translation role. What do I mean by that? You translate the objectives, the goals into operational terms right through. By doing that, then, you know, accountability comes through. So the ESG reports in that aspect also become very important. And also to ensure that the ESG promises, efforts, and progress, as highlighted in the ESG report, are attained. And the ESG report is expected, like in my case, that it will set expectations for future operations. And by that, you are creating sustainability. Then you need to identify and develop long-term strategies and sustainable solutions, as well as allow for the creation and development of new businesses and opportunities. I know Rachel did allude to what ESG is all about, but I think it's always important when you are trying to make right people to highlight to them advantages, the benefits. So what are some of the benefits of an ESG report? I would say the investor demand. It allows the investor to make, if they want to invest, for example, in a league or a professional club, it will enable them to make the right decisions. Then when it comes to brand loyalty, consumers are likely to favor and exhibit more brand loyalty with those organizations that report on ESG initiatives and progress. When it comes to compliance, yes, an ESG report provides a way for organizations to make proper disclosure and helps ensure regulatory compliance. Risk management, I think it was ably handled. And lastly, goal tracking. When it comes to an ESG report, it's a way for an organization to be accountable for its ESG performance, claims, and strategy. I think I'd like to end there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. See, it's actually quite technical. Something about the sports industry is for a long time taken it very seriously, regarded it as some sort of dirty enterprise. But the reality is the way the world is changing, the way investors are even reacting now. sports organizations are actually in a vantage position. They already attract numbers. They have the numbers. They attract the full strata of society. So what would it take implementing ESG to actually boost your sporting organization's revenue, brand, health and safety, diversity? These are issues that can be, to my mind, quite easily tackled because of the nature, the unique nature of sports being a sort of looked at as a social enterprise. So now I want to go back to Rachel, and I want to ask you a practical question now. For people in the audience who have sporting organizations as clients, for people who want to set up credible leagues, or they want to set up credible pressure groups, or you name it, but sports is sort of is the spread. What would the best practices and compliance strategies be for ESG reporting? Can they say an A to Z or a beginner's guide? What would be the best practices they can begin with? Because we really want people to have practical takeaways that they can say, yes, I learned this and I'm implementing it, and I want to charge the audience to have just 3 takeaways from this webinar that they can go away and implement. So Rachel, over to you. Best practices, compliance strategies for ESG.
No problem. Thank you. So building upon what Joseph and Olumide have already shared, I think the key, what we're all saying is embrace ESG in the way that fits your sports organization's DNA, but you have to make sure you have things concretely. So you need to put concrete things in place that then you can report on. So I think that type of approach will define the things that I'm recommending that can be done. So there are different activities you can take on and consider. I'll give some examples that allow you, that I believe are best practices that can link directly to what you can report on. So it's important, number one, to develop an ESG policy which provides clear ESG orientations for your sports organizations. Where do you stand on ESG and why? And what do you have to do with respect to those orientations at a policy level? Secondly, you need to consider undertaking what we call an ESG strategic assessment. Understand the ESG risk and the ESG opportunity your sports organization is faced with. You can also consider integrating ESG aspects into your existing data collection modalities. You collect data regularly on different aspects. Why not integrate ESG considerations into that data? And it could be how much waste is produced, how much energy is consumed, how many of your suppliers pay fair and equitable wages. There are different things you can do. You can design corporate social responsibility programs that embed explicit environmental and social objectives. What am I talking about? We often see campaigns where uniforms are given away or medicines, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're giving it to a community where they don't have access to portable water, or they're very close to a landfill, you want to look at how your CSR programs can tackle some of the real everyday issues in addition to what you're giving them in kind. You can consider conducting environmental and social assessments and audits on the infrastructure facilities that you own. I'm talking about stadiums, gyms, clinics, have your athletes. What is going on? Are they in line with occupational health and safety concerns? Do you have ramps and other infrastructure that allow for what we call disability inclusion, so people with disabilities be able to access them? You can assess your supply chain ESG risks, including human rights violations. You can establish criteria to promote sponsorship packages that are driven by environmental and social sustainability. Now, this is new in the sense that a lot of times sponsorship is very corporate driven, whoever's going to bring us some money, because when it comes to sports in Africa, there often isn't enough financing. However, you also have to look at who you're taking the money from. What is their track record, and what are some of their liabilities and reputational risks they might bring by association? And it does not mean that you just take money to take money. You look at ESG criteria to determine the type of sponsors you engage with, and can create new categories in which you look for sponsors who embrace ESG in a different way. Now, this was done, if I remember right, with NBA Africa, bringing in a sponsor that is in the renewable energy sector, for instance. Now, you can embrace ESG practices that are related to water and energy consumption, waste, including digital waste, meaning what do you do with your mobile phones, your laptops, everything when you're done with them, and land management. You can also promote what we call eco-entrepreneurship and social business opportunities for your athletes, coaches, and local community members. Some things don't always have to happen on ESG on the field or in the boardroom. Some things can happen elsewhere. You can instill the skills or provide opportunities or connect to opportunities that are ecologically and socially driven. That can also be a benefit that you can take credit for having facilitated that role and also report on. You can devise sustainability fan engagement initiatives and programs. You engage your fans in different ways. Why not also on sustainability initiatives? You can formulate strategic partnerships with ESG-focused organizations, either to advance your existing programs or to develop new ones. You can develop what we call comprehensive environmental, social, and management systems. Now, this is especially if you're a large organization that is looking for financing, especially from international lenders who have quite strict sustainability criteria. So we always talk about we can't get access to financing, we can't get access, but do you understand what investors and international lenders look for? And then the things they look for, the due diligence, legal, and others, they also have ESG-related criteria. An environmental and social management system help you tackle the ESG aspects and show that making an investment in your league, in your club, whatever the case might be, will also have ESG benefits and also mitigate ESG risk. You can also obtain more knowledge on ESG and its linkages to sports. Today, we're talking broadly, but the things that are quite unique about ESG when it comes to golf, when it comes to cricket, rugby. I know everybody loves football, but there are other sports that we also play in Africa. So it's understanding those contemporary sports, as well as we have a lot of traditional sports, traditional running, boating, and others. So to look at what are those linkages between ESG and sports, and how can training programs and research projects help upskill you and the staff or your stakeholders. Now, lastly, let me touch on this issue on compliance. A lot of African countries don't have mandatory ESG reporting. It's still voluntary. Other countries is mandatory in the sense that sports organizations are not fined if they don't report on ESG. However, global trends and regional trends, even in Africa, are going to change that. There are a lot of mandatory reporting that's coming in place in different aspects around climate change, so greenhouse gas emissions, deforestation, other issues. It's coming to our backyard indirectly. We also need to make sure that sports organizations operating in Africa start to prepare themselves so they're not caught off guard or blocked from being able to operate in or contribute to other markets or bring people from other markets to markets. Lastly, there's some global initiatives I think we should all try and familiarize ourselves with, because that can help on this journey as you figure out with ESG. So with two entities. So the United Nations Climate Change, with UNFCCC, has developed what's known as Sports for Climate Action Initiative. Now, this initiative includes a number of ways in which it guides and supports sports organizations to achieve global climate change goals. At the same time, there's also another organization, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, or IUCN, that's developed the Sports for Nature framework. So, and it also guides and supports sports organizations to contribute to the protection and restoration of nature. So these things are important because you'll hear us often talk about nature-based solutions, green economy, blue economy. So what are we doing with environment and social on land? Are we doing environment and social in water bodies? Because we also have water sports that people often forget, surfing, swimming, other things that go on that people forget actually exist. We need to find the balance when it comes to ESG between contemporary and traditional sports linked to the green economy and the blue economy, where opportunities exist. So we take a much more holistic approach to ESG. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'm slightly lagging my network, but I caught the last part of what Rachel presentation. And I thought it was really, really insightful, just all the various areas. But one thing I want to be directing to you, Mr. Lala, hope you can hear me. Am I heard? Can you all hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
I'm not the one that has the bad network. Okay, good. So, Mr. Lala, I know you are a climate change expert, and I'm just going to play devil's advocate. There comes a point when things are changing, the tide is changing, and people don't believe it. They think, oh, this is just hype. This is just another way to make money. So my question to you is, how can we truly convince people at home, whether it's domestically in Nigeria or in Uganda or Zambia, that there is value in adopting ESG and adopting early? Because I hope everybody understands, the audience, that we are on the cusp of just the cusp of something quite new. And every trend has how do we advise people to jump on that train? And it's not just a fact, it's actually here to stay. It has realizable benefit. So if you just want to, I would say, what would be your pitch to the, without giving too much away, potential?
I'm assuming you've actually stopped asking the question because you've just broken off, and I'm hoping that I'm audible to everybody else. Yeah. So look, I think apart from Donald Trump, I think everybody right now is beginning to understand the fact that climate change is here. I saw a clip that was a post that was sent out in Nigeria last week. I think it was either towards the end of last week or the beginning of this week, showing a diagram showing the map of the country and the extreme temperature rise. Yeah, that is beginning to impact people, and the advice that was being provided by government on how to look after yourself. Look, we've talked about the why and we've talked about the what, and I guess we're looking about how, but you cannot relate the how until you accept the fact that things are changing. Look, if the temperature is getting warmer, it affects all our natural resources, and by default, as an institution, which a sporting organization is, it's a business. So Rachel made reference to organizations and carbon policies and things like that. In the final analysis, because you're an institution that either borrows money or requires investment, even policies, climate-related financial risks and opportunities that relate to financial institutions reporting will affect businesses that are in the sporting environment. Social impact reporting is also another one that is required. So, from the S perspective, rather than look at it from a sustainability perspective, I will look at it from a social impact. How you treat your employees, how you treat your stakeholders as the temperature rises, and climatic effects on your environment changes your business operations and your supply chain. Also,
Mr. Lala, we lost you. I think we lost him temporarily. Well, I was hoping for him to come back. I think he's coming back.
Sorry, I got disconnected
Okay,
for a second.
You're back on. You're back.
I do apologize. I don't know what happened. But the point I was trying to make is the temperature and the climatic changes in Asia and South America is different from what's affecting us in Africa. So we need to understand, Rachel made reference to data collection. It's imperative, not just important, but imperative that we collect data so that we analyze it and implement solutions and policies that are fit for purpose. Because ultimately, we're dealing with people, we're dealing with our resources, but at the same time, business survival depends on the efficiency of its operations vis-a-vis what it does. So, for us to even begin to understand, we need one of the things we're not very good at is collecting data, but we're improving on that. But it's not the fact that we're not collecting data. I actually think we're not connecting data because data is being collected by different agencies across Africa. But from a sporting perspective, because you haven't understood yourself to be a business that is being impacted by climate change, you think it only applies to financial institutions or oil and gas and the likes. So you don't actually begin to seek information from those data portals, your Ministry of Environment, your Ministry of Transport, and all that kind of stuff, to see how you can improve things within your organization. So, I mean, Rachel made reference to some of the things that we potentially. Once you accept the fact that things are changing around you, then it's about limited, it's about awareness and understanding. That's the very first point. So, many sports organizations, they lack the awareness of what is actually available, what ESG is, what it means to them. That needs to be understood before you even get to the point of reporting. What reporting does, it basically institutionalizes what you're supposed to do, but you got to create the metrics first. But that comes from understanding. Resource constraints. Look, the reason why we're here, this is very nascent. It's quite nascent at the moment. So to a large extent, we don't have enough people with the right information and knowledge to actually go around, let alone, they're not around the corner for every sports institution. So we got to train more people to have better understanding of what we're doing. The reporting around infrastructure tools, Rachel made reference to some of the policies that we can put in place. Data collection, she made reference, but imperative to collect data, standardize data across. So sporting agencies need to help standardize the data that we need to use to evaluate our positions vis-a-vis the environment around us. Governance imperative. Look, a lot of us, one of the challenges we always have in Africa is about accountability. Yeah. Joseph mentioned our obligations to our investors. We need to report. If we're making reporting on a financial level, which we do anyway, we should integrate the social impact of what we do, not just to our employees, not just to the sporting athletes themselves, but more importantly to our stakeholders into our general financial reports. So, and of course, in the social context, I've already said, we have diverse economy across the continent. We have diverse type of sports events. And so the policies that we put in place need to be fit for purpose. The factor around poverty, inequality, environmental degradation, which has been exacerbated by climatic changes. The organizations need to understand what those challenges are and how they affect their organization, and in addressing social and environmental issues. And finally, communication is important. I think one of my colleagues actually made reference to that. You need to engage and communicate with your stakeholders, and your stakeholders include your fans. We talked about brand loyalty. I think Joseph mentioned that. Your fans, your sponsors, government agencies, local communities. It's essential to have that report out there. Look, we're doing things already. It's good for people to know what we're doing. And if there are things that we're not doing so well, we need to improve on it. But we can only understand that, through different language barriers, our cultural differences, and improving our limited channels of communication, and utilize all the social media we have for various dialoguing. But all in all, we are in a good place right now. And I think it's time the sporting organization on board, just as the financial, the oil and gas and other sectors have, and engage community, engage with stakeholders, and begin to put a sense of governance, but also the obligation. They need to recognize the obligation that they have to their stakeholders.
I really thank you, Mr. Lama. And I know it sounds basic communication, but one of the major pain points I think I've even experienced myself as a stakeholder is just having access to information. You want access to, say, a complaints box. You want access to become a sponsor in your own little way, access to purchases or merchandise, and you can't find this information. So I like how you sort of emphasized communication in itself is a tool for ESG. It's through communication you can capture your OKRs, your KPIs, and all the acronyms. How many people are you reaching out to on a monthly basis? What is the traffic of viewers to your website, to your social media? And these are little things that sporting organizations should take more seriously, because it's when you have more eyes, more eyeballs on, when there's more confirmed visible eyeballs on your assets, your social media assets, then you can even attract those investors that you're looking for. So everything is really intertwined. So I really like what you said. I also wanted to segue a point on transparency and corruption. I want to segue this to you, Joseph. Now, we all know that corruption is a major issue, lack of transparency in our sporting industry. Something we're proud of, but I like that Mr. Lala said we're getting better, things are changing. So I think my question to you, as you are in the seat, you are in the hot seat, you're CEO of Zambia Premier League. So don't mind me asking, what steps do you take to guarantee ethical behavior within the league? How have you improved and boosted accountability and encouraged good sports governance? Because we all know sports governance is its own terminology alongside corporate governance. So we're talking sports governance now. And I mean, you can share, or maybe you don't want to, the secrets of how you boosted and taken the Zambian Premier League to new heights. Because the truth is, compliance is good for business, sustainability is good for business, accountability, transparency, these are all good practices. But we need to convince the stakeholders that they. So what are you doing practically to ensure good ethics, good ethical behavior, accountability, and openness in the running of your league? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think first and hello? I think first and foremost, I think the association has done commendably well by creating the ethics committee, which has been very, very strict. People that are found wanting have been taken there. They are given a fair hearing. And secondly, I think rather than going to CAS, we've created a body in terms of appeal where people can go so that you see they feel that they are not unfairly treated. And recently, we did review our code of conduct, code of ethics. So at every 10, we emphasize the need for being transparent from our side, the need for being compliant, and also monthly reports. We created monthly reports where people can report any undue activities. Also put up a whistleblowing policy. So we found out that people feel now that they are being heard, and there's been a reduction in uncouth behavior, so to speak.
That's encouraging. That is encouraging. What caught my attention was you talked about an ethics committee. Could you tell us a bit more about that, the ethics? Not in much detail, but it's something that you as a governance structure has really helped improve ethical, or has reduced unethical practices and has improved governance.
Yes, it has. Because to start with, to create independence, we've appointed independent people, mostly lawyers. So the issue of subjectivity has been taken away, and objectivity has been pushed on that score.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. So now I'm going to come to you, Rachel, just to talk a little bit more, I guess, from a consulting perspective, because I think there might be people in the audience, although I think it's almost time for us to have reactions from the audience. So don't forget to put your questions in the chat box. We really want to hear from you. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So I guess the question I have for you, Rachel, is How often do you interact with lawyers in the course of your ESG consulting work? What role do you feel lawyers can play? Not just lawyers now, non-lawyers as well. So, because we're all looking at this now as a potentially new, huge area that has so many opportunities. Kind of reminds me of when compliance became big post the Enron fallout and the post-accounting scandal. So this is another, I would say this could be a deeper level of compliance. It's not just tick boxing. You really have to demonstrate commitment to these areas. So do you just want to, highlight opportunities that could be available for people looking to work in this area, either as a consultant like yourself, or perhaps as a support, either a lawyer, accountant, or even a sports executive? How can a sports executive themselves play a role in promoting this?
Thank you for that. I think I've been doing ESG for a long time. So way before it became popular, I think COVID made it go to the next level, but I was doing it way before in the trenches. So I would say there are two aspects. I think you have to look at the academic side as academic credentials and professional credentials. To understand ESG, even if you specialize in one of the areas, it's important to have some level of academic training, either at the graduate level, let's say a master's degree of some sort, or you've gone to upskill yourself either through training, certificates, or other courses, because that knowledge is key, because the domain that can get highly technical sometimes. And depending on where you're applying it, it's also understanding where do you draw a line? How do I understand ESG for that sector or subsector? And I think that's important. The academic credentials give you that capacity. Now, professional credentials, there are a lot of maybe careers. So where do I come across lawyers? All the time. Because whenever you're dealing with, and it's actually a good thing, it's a very good thing, because the lawyers will make sure, like yourself, Beverly, and others at OAL, will make sure that when you're looking at ESG, you also understand the legislation and the regulation that exists at a local level, at a national level, at a regional level, and internationally. A sports organization is a business. If you don't understand how to comply with laws, including laws that relate to environment, health, safety, and social aspects, you already find yourself in cases of non-compliance, or where your permits can be revoked, or you'll realize that your licenses, you haven't met conditions for those licenses. And this is important not only in sports, but let's say in complementary sectors. So sports sits not by itself. There are complementary sectors, let's say tourism, energy, transport, ICT, that are part of the bigger ecosystem that supports sports and others. So it's really important to understand and listen to the advice of lawyers. They are environmental lawyers. There are also other lawyers, what we call corporate lawyers, project finance lawyers, and others. So that's key. But there are also others. When you're dealing in the investment world, you have investment bankers, commercial bankers, investment professionals, that whole domain, who also, their role is also to make sure ESG is reflected even in financial models, accounting models. You heard us talk about accountability. Accountability also means making sure you bring a diverse set of professionals to the table with different skills that allow you to understand the full dimension of ESG, how far to go and not, and also your evolution. Now, in terms of skills, especially for those who are newer or starting their careers or want to, take a little career shift or twist, there's growing areas where there's need of more people. Say ESG analysts. People are actually their role and the analyzing. They're called ESG analysts or ESG research analysts or data analysts, whatever the case is. Those people are key who are able to do it. So that one is a key area that has to grow. You also have to have the engineers. Obviously, you have your environmental and other engineers, but people often forget also on the social side. You have a lot of people on the social side. When you're building those stadiums that you see the final product. We saw the AFCON and the final product in d'Ivoire. But behind those stadiums, sometimes the infrastructure work, settlement, you have to displace communities. So there's a whole body of work around involuntary resettlement, then with social specialists like myself come in to make sure you're moving people, you're addressing economic livelihoods, you're not making people poorer. Then there's a governance aspect. Just like we heard Joseph say, what's in place to ensure that once you handle the environment and the social, you also address the governance. So in other words, professionals with different skill sets, academic and professional, can help you see these linkages that exist between what I call the E, the S, and the G, and to ensure to some extent they kind of stay on the same level playing field. For a long time, the E was here, the G was here, and the S was always left behind. But we live in Africa and we deal with poverty and fragility. So even when you're talking about sports in the context of our conflict-affected and post-conflict countries, it's different. So understanding how to use sports not only as a unifier, but how do you bring sports to help bring infrastructure to address psychological traumas? That's another area, the social side of ESG, that oftentimes that gets neglected. And then lastly, I'll say this, sports has a legacy dimension to it. We have a lot of big tournaments, infrastructure, then so what? When the tournaments are done, what happens? We have a lot of examples of white elephants across Africa where there was no thinking around the legacy. We have to move beyond planning that's very short term. You apply the ESG lens, allows you to do longer term planning, sustainability oriented planning that allows you to build in legacy. What do we do these structures? What materials do we use? Do we need to use that much cement? Do we need to use that much grass? How do we then deal with ecosystem services, biodiversity? What flora do we use, plants? How are we affecting things? You look at that whole dimension. I would say in a nutshell, that's how I look at it. That's how I've seen it. And just understanding the direct, indirect, and cumulative ESG impacts that exist depending on the project that you're working on. You have policies and other mechanisms to ensure that they end up being sustainable in the long term.
Absolutely wonderful, Rachel. Again, things as you were speaking, things that are just coming to my mind as to the roles people can play as ESG, potentially as consultants on special projects, legacy projects. I love what you said about we have too many white elephants in Africa. We don't think enough about long-term use of these spaces. It's interesting, I was at another event last week and we spoke on this and I raised the topic of why don't we look more at having smart cities, and imagine the number of various expertise and professionals that would need to come together to develop such a project. So ESG kind of becomes the glue that binds the lawyers, the accountants, the financiers, the sports experts, and so on and so forth. So I love how ESG just brings that unique perspective. It's the link. It links everything together. Now, what I want to now move on to is, there's a question in the chat actually from Oscar. Oscar, thank you so much for your question. And I'll read out the question. It says, what sustainable practices or innovations do you think African leagues, clubs, associations can take to improve revenue, growth, awareness, and sustainability? I'd like to divide that into two. So I would like Joseph, as the CEO of a league, take on the revenue and growth piece. And I would like Mr. Lala to take on the awareness and sustainability. So I'm going to start with Mr. Lala. What sustainable practices, innovations can leagues, clubs take to improve awareness and sustainability?
Do I go? I think that first and foremost, from the revenue aspect of things, the moment we look at ESG as a cost driver, we'll lose the touch. Because I'll tell you one thing, things like cost reduction, increasing price, cultivating opportunities, they are susceptible to the law of diminishing returns. You can only do so much. So for a program like ESG, I would rather depend on three pillars. First and foremost, look at it as a product. What benefits inherent I did outline some of the benefits, like investors are able to make quick decisions, the speed of doing things. Then secondly, go to the consumers. The consumers are likely, I did mention even before, consumers are likely to vouch for, for an organization that has put ESG reporting in perspective. And thirdly, I think it's a geography. Where are the target markets? The world is moving that direction. And you see, when you look at the population, there are the millennials and the Gen Z. These are the guys that are going to move the world. So right from the start, you need to engage them. It's an investment. You may not necessarily, So in a nutshell, it shouldn't be looked at as a cost driver. It's some of the things that you see with ESG are inherent or invisible benefits, intangible benefits, which ultimately will give you the right perspective. But also you need to look at it from the sustainability point of view. And sustainability, first and foremost, you need to be creative. And this is what I think ESG in a nutshell is trying to bring. New ideas. Secondly, continuous improvement. You need to be improving at all times. And thirdly, you need to be sensing weak signals, which is about risk management. And lastly, you need to be responsive. So from my end, every program, I'll tell you, like recently, a lady based in Australia, a Zambian based in Australia, brought in a program to do with mental strength. What I told her, you see, in Africa, the moment people hear the word mental, they think of madness. So we had to tweak it. We are calling it character building. So you get the point. Because you see, when the character of club members, officials, and players, when they have the better character, their attitude changes, they'll perform better, they'll qualify to bigger tournaments, African tournaments. Their country will go to the World Cup, where you are guaranteed $8 million. So you need to look at it from a long-term perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I loved how you showed us the analogy, and you showed us that ESG can have an indirect benefit, but a powerful benefit. And we shouldn't look at it as a cost driver, but rather we should look at it as, say, definitely not a cost driver. You're not doing it just for the cost. You're doing it for those indirect benefits that can actually boost image, the income. So thank you so much for that example. Now, Mr. Lala, please, could you give us some examples, practical examples, sustainable practices, innovations you've come across? And it doesn't necessarily have to be confined to sports. It could be in another sector, maybe in climate, that you think the leagues, clubs, federations in Africa can translate into their areas to boost awareness and sustainability. Thank you.
Thanks for that question. Now, if I just to lean on some of the points that have been made by Rachel and more recently by Joseph. If you look at Africa, population-wise, 65 to 70% of the population of Africa is around about mid-age, 19, 20, if that. A vast majority of our children are actually below the age of 16. Sports, by default, is a generational, which starts, and if I look at two sectors, banking, for instance, is where you say cradle to the grave. There's always a saying that you're more likely to get divorced than actually change your bank account. Yeah? So I align that to brand loyalty when it comes to sports. The second one, I was actually looking at a video only yesterday in the agricultural sector, where just leaning on what Joe said in terms of ESG shouldn't be looked at from a cost perspective. You see, if you change the way that we view sports itself and how it relates to the stakeholders, in this case, the youth. When I was growing up, we were all reliant, we all loved foreign music, and all our local football teams is what we supported. Rangers, ISCC, Bendel Insurance, and the likes. Today, we all have Afrobeat, and we now support foreign teams. And a brand like Manchester and AC Milan are massive. They did a lot of great stuff. So some of the things that we could be looking at is, how do you seek to look at some of the examples and innovation that they've gone through? But as Joseph said, we need to copy and paste with the local nuances. I like the analogy of mental and character. Yeah, the same thing, but we need to look at ourselves. I pick from this agriculture. I look at. I was just thinking, and apparently there's somebody from the Gambia here. There's an agricultural initiative that is going on in Nigeria at the moment, which I just ran into, where the children are brought in and are trained from school to be agricultural professionals, but not from the perspective of being employees once they've trained, but actually be partners. So they're seen as business partners. Now, if you look at it from a sporting perspective, the long-term strategy, and when you talk about ESGs and maybe some aspects of it, we've spoken about governance, for instance, but it takes a vision where, from the strategy perspective, you begin to see these people as your long-term partners as opposed to your customers. Yeah. And literally, when you begin to train and come up with some of this character building or initiatives that Joseph made reference to, the alignment with the sport translates from a CSR to actually improving the operational as well as the profitability of the organization. Because what you then do, from a brand loyalty perspective, you win the souls and minds of these people because they remember the goodwill and they stick with you. Yeah. So, in terms of how do we begin to build generations of new sporting people on the continent who actually want to develop sporting events, we shouldn't be developing sports folks on the continent just for the transfer market, which is what we seem to have done over the last 20 years, because that's what's literally killed our sporting events in the country. And that speaks to what Rachel was saying. Yeah, you build stadiums, right, for events. At AFCON, for instance, spend a lot of money. But what happens afterwards? These are facilities that can be used by schools, by the communities to train new
Weddings.
yes, fledglings, exactly. And we can then put more money into our sport communities as well. Let's begin to look inwards, because it's not just about them leaving and then the dollars back. No, we need to begin to actually bring back those times when foreigners want to come and actually play with us. We need to partner with peering with various, our local teams with foreign teams, whether it's in football, basketball, athletics. It doesn't really matter. Not every country in Africa plays football. I mean, Kenya, for instance, is known for athletics. Making fun the other day with my Ugandan friends, and Rachel is here, that, oh, AFCON, where were you? They don't play football. They do other things. Rwanda plays basketball. Yeah. So, we need to understand that not everyone will fit into what we call the norm. So we need to look at each country, look at the strengths. But one thing is certain, we have a vast majority of resources when it comes to our human capital in terms of growing population that can fit into this. But they need to be reassured that the organizations are there for their own development as opposed to just the profitability of the organization. And that is where we all need to come together. And I know, and just, in final, I think if we begin to look at this, ESG, addressing the ESG challenges that we have requires a concerted effort from us. Yeah, no, there's no monopoly on innovation or knowledge here. Organizations, governments, regulatory body, we all have to come together to work together with all the other stakeholders and provide some support and resource to guide the enabling factor for all of this organization. And I think, in all honesty, Africa is at the cusp of greatness. We just need to enhance. Nigeria, for instance, apparently, I looked at the numbers now. This is probably not data that I cited. Nigeria actually has the 10th most expensive team in the world. I bet you didn't know that. The team, if you collectively, the value of all players is actually the 10th most expensive team in the world, national team in the world. But how does that translate? Okay, yes, we got to the second, but we're better. We should play on global stages. Pele said 40 years ago that there comes a time when an African country will win the World Cup. Well, unless we change the way we do things, it's not going to happen. So we need to actually begin to look at how we look after our own people. Let me stop there.
Thank you, Mr. Lana. Okay, I mean, this has been such an insightful conversation. We covered everything from insights, practical ways to implement. We didn't dwell much on challenges, which I like. We really went for how can people begin to implement ESG strategy, why we need to do it, the benefits, the value, the interconnectivity between various sectors, even within the sporting industry, all sport areas from catering, hospitality, education, capacity building, manufacturing, and whatnot, supply chain. We've really covered quite a bit in the last hour. I don't see any other questions. So I think what I might do is I'll use the next 5 minutes to ask each of you to leave, say, what would be your closing, what do you really want people to take away? So everyone give an opportunity, everyone get an opportunity to give a lasting comment. It's either you're giving them a call to action, something that they need to do, or something that they need to research upon, or something that they need to go connect with. But I really want them to have a practical feel to today. And so far, the comments have been good. I've been getting private comments though. It would have been nice to get more in the chat so we can validate what they're talking about. But no, definitely, I've learned so much from today. Oh, to the panelists, could you please drop your, oh, I think I see one more question pop up. My hand has been up. Oh no, I didn't see it. Yes, we're taking comments. I don't quite know how to make you speak. So do you want to type? Izzy, type out your question. You can take yours as the last question. Could the panelists please drop their contacts, your emails, social media, your LinkedIn, so people can reach out to you following this conversation. Izzy, could you please type your question so we can take it? But in the meantime, I think let's start with Rachel. Rachel, what's closing out?
Okay. I would say very simply, pick, just like you've made a goal, your New Year's goal, your New Year's resolution, pick an ESG goal for this year. Pick an ESG goal that you're going to associate or link your organization with. And pick it so that when we have our next webinar, you can come and tell us what that ESG goal or ambition is, how you're doing it, and if there are areas where you might need support. And this applies to sports organizations because our goal is to build, it's important to build a community and show to the world, while we're amazing when it comes to sports talent, we can also be amazing when it comes to sports and ESG. That's my request to everybody in the room.
Good, good, thank you. Mr. Lala, I come to you now.
I think I think my point would be to go beyond webinars. We do a lot of talking on the continent. And I think we need to go beyond webinars and actually begin to prefer and show examples of what we've done. I mean, I particularly like some of the things that Joseph made reference to, and I think we should take note of that because there are elements of risk management as well as metrics and targets. I would suggest that if you're already in this space, it's important to set the targets, right metrics for your organization, and most importantly, look at it from a perspective of the risks that you're trying to improve on, develop long-term strategy, but also implementing the right governance structure. Because without the governance structure, everything falls apart. I would like to take this opportunity actually to thank Rachel, especially for the area of careers that I highlighted. And I think a lot of the youth should take note. I mean, full disclosure, as you know, I've got a passion for this because one of my boys is obviously quite sporty. It's getting to that point whereby he wants to go to sports management. And I've been telling him the parts of this, legal and all that, finance and all that thing they can look at. So I'd like to thank Rachel especially for highlighting all of those career options that are available, and I would employ the youth, especially who are to go back and look at this recording and focus on that, and begin to look at areas where they can plug in. My one appeal to Joseph is that you're doing a lot of great stuff in Zambia. we need to share that with the rest of the continent. So, let's collaborate together. Let's collect the data. Let's share, and especially share the good achievements that we're making, no matter how small. Yeah, no matter how small. It encourages other people to do, because there's always this notion of it only happens elsewhere. It doesn't happen here. So we need to highlight all of those good things that we're doing and collaborate more and bring within the association the Africa and plug in the youth. That will be my final point.
I think that's a fantastic contribution. We've talked about career opportunities for ESG analysts in the industry. So for those parents like Mr. Lala who are still trying to decide, should my child do sports or not, you've suddenly got a fantastic career option. ESG analyst in sports. And for the people in the audience who are running sports organizations and you want to whip everybody into shape, set good metrics, OKRs, KPIs. I'm not going to tell you what they mean. Go and Google it if you don't know what it means. You need to set good metrics, because without good metrics, teams, your employees, your consultants will not have a sense of direction. And those are quick wins to tie into a lot of the ESG that we've discussed. And I really like the idea, Mr. Lala, of a field visit to Zambia. So let's see who'll be organizing that field trip. So you know how all the politicians here, they organize trips go to some country. But of course, on a serious note, we need to know what other successful countries are doing. So the field trip is in order. So Mr. Chimbabwe, over to you. What long-lasting advice do you want to share with the audience?
First and foremost, I think special credit to the two experts. First and foremost, I think special credit to the two experts, Rachel and Olumude. Despite them knowing so much, they didn't come with the know-it-all attitude. I could see that they came with the learn-it-all instead of the know-it-all. Thank you very much. I'm very humbled. I think to Beverly, I don't know. I've even run out of words. I know we are meeting next month at the Botswana football.
In Botswana, yes, yes.
Yeah. Then to the rest of the participants, we can only win if we are uniquely better. As Africans, I was very happy at the last AFCON to see Europeans praising how well our referees did in Cote d'Ivoire, condemning their own referee. So even from the ESG point of view, we can be uniquely better. First and foremost, we must be learners and not critics. Secondly, we need to open our eyes and minds. And thirdly, we need to change that. You see, when we talk about Africa, it's always about the how. I think for once, let's make it the wow. You get the point? And this is the wow factor I got from Rachel and Olumide. When they spoke, I was just simply saying, wow, 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 wow. And I'm very proud to hear that from Africans who are so much of experts on the topic. And lastly, we should only be asking uniquely better questions. Thank you very much. I'm humbled.
Thank you so much. It seems like there's been a rush of comments. I'll just take the comments. There's no time for questions, but I will read them out just to honor you. So Luca Ugudzoni says ESG shall be part of the sports teams, organizers, writers as part of value proposition to create a shared value approach, and sports has the value to build upon that value. So thank you for your contribution. Ijoma Lasoe says, thank you, panelists, for thought-provoking session. I'm thinking about finding a way to sell this idea to regulatory bodies. Yes, please do, especially in sports, and it will do our continent a lot of good and even increase revenue for our leagues. Thank you once more. Thank you. You're very welcome. Antonio Calisto says, what are the benefits and importance of implementing ESG in grassroots sports? And how can this filter through? I think I answered a lot of those questions, but there's opportunity for you to interact directly with both Rachel, Mr. Lala, and Joseph. So please, Mr. Lala, Joseph, put your contacts in the chat. I really don't want to close this chat before you've dropped your contacts. Andy Udoji says, I'm a lawyer and sports manager. I would love to connect with panelists for interaction with regards to my ongoing PhD work, which is on sports governance. That's a fantastic area to write on. I was thinking about it in my mind. I think I'll just rather stick to the practical side of things. But yes, you know, kudos to you. I think we need more experts. Like Joseph said, it's amazing to know that we have these gems amongst us. We don't even know, you know, so we don't always have to look overseas or to people who are not African for support. We have a wealth of Africans that have deep level of understanding of ESG, cutting across various sectors, not just sports. So on this note, I want to say again, a huge thank you. Again, without the participation of my wonderful panelists, this would never have happened. We came up with the idea, but it takes the collaboration to make these things happen. And Mr. Lala, we promise to do a lot more take action, not just talking. So we've already given the audience a call to action. We hope to hear from them in various ways, whether emails, or they'll reach out to you and tell you what fantastic things they're doing with ESG. So until next time, but do look out, we're going to be hosting another webinar on ESG. This is an ESG webinar series. This is the second in the set of this, looking at impact finance and ESG. So join us on this adventure in ESG. I think there's a lot we're going to gain from it. And till next time, and you watch the replay, which will be put up on our website. So just look out for the details. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time, and for taking. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us. Appreciate it. And it's been a pleasure meeting my co-panelists.
Same here. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Olumide. Of course, thanks, Beverly.
Everyone.
A pleasure.
God bless.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.